Hey, what's up guys? So you want to know my opinion on the latest Skirk and Escoffier banners that just got announced. And just for context, to be honest, I really don't often make banner reviews or pull videos because I personally am a firm believer in just pulling who you like. Even if you're trying to do the end game, that's what I do personally. But I know a lot of you have been asking that you really like Skirk Escoffier, but you also really like someone else. So you just want to know my perspective and help you decide who you might want to prioritize. And that's fine. So let's make this video. Here are the banners that just got announced. We've got Skirk with two good supports for her, Charlotte and Dahlia. Then you've also got Escoffier, Skirk's main support, running at the same time. And then we've got a weapon banner, some good things, some bad things that we can talk about. So we can start with a question I'm sure you're wondering is, from my perspective, how meta is Skirk Escoffier? First of all, I'm sure if you've watched my channel before, you would know I'm a big fan of Skirk Escoffier. Personally, I cleared Stygian Onslaught Dire with this core every single time without fail. Even in times like this where I may not have cleared Dire completely, I still would have managed to do one of the bosses with my Skirk team. I always use Farina, but sometimes I use Shenhe, sometimes Seat Lali, sometimes Mona. I even just made a video using Charlotte. I'm a big fan of these characters, not even just design wise and vibe wise, but also as a general recommendation for players. You know, you add your Hydro teammate, you unlock freeze, and these freeze teams are, relatively speaking, very easy to play at a basic level. You don't have to worry about any complicated reactions. You don't technically need to do any complicated animation cancels on Skirk. As I've shown in countless videos, if you get Skirk, Escoffier and Farina, you've got like 10 different fourth teammates you can play on your team, including 2 of them on the banner here, meaning there's a good amount of flexibility. It's just not that easy for Hoyo to counter these teams, meaning they're really good in most content and they're also really good at brute forcing a lot of the time. But if they're good at brute forcing, that also means that there isn't that much content directly tailored for freeze. Not even just Stygian, but even just looking at some of these Stygian bosses, like how many of them were actually designed for freeze? Probably this secret source automaton, and then that's it. So honestly, being famous for being brute forcing is not necessarily a good thing. You can also be like a Flynn's team, and then you get just like non-stop bosses and enemies shilling you. Also, to be completely honest, when people talk about brute forcing can require pretty good builds a lot of the time, and also pretty good skill. And just because I guess skilled players, maybe myself or another content creator, can do endgame with our C0 Skirks and our just C0 teams, or even our C0 Moikas, even if we can make stuff look straightforward with low investment, doesn't necessarily mean you can, and doesn't necessarily mean it's realistic for most players. And I bring up Skirk and Moika because ultimately with these old DPSs, I know they're only 1 year old, but with these old DPSs, even though they are still very much competitive with newer teams, you absolutely are, I guess, fighting against the wind. Especially as months continue to go by and these characters get even more older. Even though they're strong, you're definitely fighting uphill battles, since when you look at Luna teams, these teams are clearly more shield, and it's clearly much more enemies and content designed around them, and honestly they're even clearly easier to play. Obviously Luna teams too can be in the same position as Skirk and Moika months or even a year from now. Therefore I would say, even though I love playing these teams and I kind of would still recommend them, I also do want to give an ultimate recommendation that I do think for most players, if you are looking for the easiest time, you probably could just prioritize a newer team for both strength and longevity. Although with Genshin at this point, it's really hard to consider longevity in general. Going back to the banner, I know this is Skirk and Escoffier's first reruns, and one of the big discussions is always going to be how restrictive are they. But I would say it's not actually that bad. To be honest, a lot of the top teams are somewhat restrictive nowadays, but at least as I've mentioned before, these freeze teams are very flexible in the content you can tackle. There are a wide variety of Hydro or Cryo teammates you can play, at least in the last slot, that even relatively speaking, they're kind of more flexible than people give these teams credit for. The one thing I would say is I'm sure you know by now, but you do really want Skirk, Escoffier, and Farina. We'll talk about if you can get away without Farina later, but for the most part, you kind of do want this trio, which can be seen as restrictive. So if you don't have Farina, or you only have enough pulls for Skirk and Escoffier, then that could definitely impact if you want to spend your primos this patch. But I should add, you can apply that with a lot of modern teams these days. Like you could say the same thing with Nefer and Lauma, and basically all the other Lunar characters. Most teams do have some sort of restrictive duo. Skirk kind of has a restrictive trio, as I said, but there's definitely pros and cons with requirements. Also, quite a few people were asking me how Skirk compares with Ayaka, because I've made loads of videos on both these characters at this point. To be honest, Ayaka is still a pretty good DPS, especially compared to most other old characters of her generation. But I would say this is something that a lot of people did get wrong early on in Skirk's release, in that a lot of people said that there wasn't that much of a difference between Ayaka and Skirk, but I would say there is a clear gap between her and Skirk for several reasons, and not just DPS wise. What I would say is in practice, the game really does expose Ayaka's design issues, at least versus modern content. Ayaka is very burst reliant, and she's also very burst window reliant. You're doing so much of your team's damage in a specific amount of time. You don't really have that much flexibility outside of that, whereas Skirk can also do her team's damage in a very specific burst window. But Skirk can be flexible. Sometimes you can do hybrid playstyle, sometimes you can do normal attack playstyle, whereas Ayaka, you only really have one way of playing her. So similarly to Skirk, Ayaka can easily set up the DPS window here. The damage, even with Ayaka C2, is definitely going to be less than my Skirk. So you can still do Dahlia for sure, but it ain't going to be as easy. The one benefit Ayaka does have over Skirk, which is one of Skirk's issues, is that Skirk teams are quite bad energy generation. So Ayaka, it's not that hard to get her bursts back. But unfortunately, okay, that's a perfect example. So I didn't time my burst right, and I ended up using Ayaka's burst when he had his increased res. So I basically wasted my burst there, and that meant in this situation I wasn't able to get the clear. So I can retry and figure out a strategy to do that. However, with Skirk, you're not really going to encounter the issue, because Skirk has 3 playstyles. You can either use Skirk's burst only, or you can do a hybrid burst and normal attack playstyle, or you can do just normals. And that depends on just how much of a damage window you want and how much damage window you need. So not only does Skirk do more damage, she's kind of just more flexible offensively than Ayaka, and pretty much any other Cryo DPS. Obviously, in theory, Ayaka can be played in other teams and she can use Animo supports. But at least at the moment, with Escoffier teams being the strongest way of playing these teams, the element flexibility doesn't really matter that much. Let's also quickly talk about Escoffier, who is obviously quite essential for Skirk and Ayaka players, with their freeze teams being their intended teams. I will say as well, at the moment, Escoffier is quote-unquote essential for other Cryo characters as well, like Ganyu, Wriothesley, especially with the current environment. If they are going to shield Cryo DPSs, it is probably going to be a freeze environment. But I would say Escoffier with any other Cryo DPS kind of has less synergy, therefore it's less good. Also, importantly, unlike Ayaka and Skirk, for other Cryo DPSs, they could quite easily release another archetype for them that would replace Escoffier, like a Melt or Superconduct version of Escoffier. And for characters like Ganyu, Wriothesley, even Eula as well, a Superconduct Escoffier. If I was a main of these other characters, I would definitely be paying attention to something else. Whereas Skirk and Ayaka, I think their destinies are very much clearly with freeze, and Escoffier is perfectly designed for freeze. I don't think she's going to be replaced anytime soon. Let's also talk about the 4 stars. To be completely honest, I think out of all of these, Candace is kind of homeless these days. I did make videos previously with Candace Arlecchino or Candace Molani teams, and that's because Candace does provide quite significant normal attack buffs, and you can also combo those normal attack buffs with an artifact set on her. However, Candace has clearly been replaced in teams like this. With Molani, she's clearly been replaced, and same thing with Arlecchino. Vape teams on Arlecchino, no one's really doing that much these days instead of Melt or Overload or even Monopyro. But Charlotte and Dahlia, absolutely meta viable for Escoffier and Skirk teams. I even did a dire Stygian clear this patch with Charlotte. In fact, I would say a team like this is probably one of the best quote-unquote budget Skirk teams that you could play. Charlotte, very good holder of the TTDS attack buff here. She can use a Noblesse set, and she doesn't even really need constellations. Dahlia, on the other hand, he does provide really good attack speed buffs, but you kind of really want that C6 to be a meta teammate for Skirk. But what's really nice, as I talked about in my Skirk upgrade order video, you don't absolutely need a premium version of them. You're more than capable of having a complete Skirk team with these budget characters. To be honest, you're probably also wondering, how good is a banner only team? Now, just for fun, I guess, let's just go into Dire with Charlotte and Candace. Don't expect this to do Dire, because Dire is like the ultimate hard mode of this game, and you do really want Farina, but let's just see what happens. For fun, if we look at the weapon banner, I can even use Skirk and Escoffier on their signature weapons, which I've got here. I could use Fav Lance on Candace, and on Charlotte, TCDS is 3-star. So this actually will be a banner only run. Let's see what happens. Okay, my team's Cryo Ab. Oh shit, I just realized this team doesn't actually work because Skirk needs off-field Hydro. Otherwise, you aren't creating Void Rifts. I was doing so well actually, but yeah, this is kind of scuffed. Okay, because we know I can already do it with Charlotte, let's try and do a Dire with Farina, but with Candace instead. Let's get the shield down with charge attacks. And now that I'm generating off-field Void Rifts, I'm actually able to build Void Rift stacks. So it seems actually playable. Candace's normal attack buffs are also pretty nice here. I frame that. Let's get these charge attacks in. And I think we're good. The only thing is, Candace doesn't have off-field cryo, so I'm gonna have to get this shield down. But yeah, we did manage to do it. So yeah, I probably could have done that even faster, but this video is not for me. This video is for you, and you probably don't care if you're clearing with 1 second to go or 500 seconds to go. So yeah, one downside of this banner is definitely that Farina is not on the banner, but I definitely would recommend playing Charlotte, or if you have C6 Mika, or even if you have neither, then Candace has to be a decent option at least. This is what I was using, Favonius Lance with the scroll set. I just built HP for her damage bonus buff. And yeah, I'm stuck on C2. So you don't need constellations with Candace or Charlotte. In fact, I didn't even level up her talents. You don't really need this either. Would have been nice if she provides a shield like Dahlia does, but oh well. So if you were curious on if you can play Candace with Skirk, I guess now you know. Let's talk about the weapon banner as well. Just talking about the 4 stars quickly. The sword is the flute and the claymore is the bell. These weapons, to be honest, are complete ass. If you're new to the game, don't worry about them. The bell in particular is quite famous for pretty much never having a use. Although interestingly, this is one of those old weapons that have jank mechanics. You can see here the 45 seconds here is blue, which you would think means if you refine it, it would actually go down. But I can stick 4 bells here. Yet the only stats that go down are the other blue stuff. So the cooldown for this shield doesn't actually get shorter. But Favonius Lance especially is, I would say, maybe even the most important weapon in the game. You stick this on your polearm support, it gives your team energy, it gives them energy. And even compared to other Favonius weapons, the reality is so many polearm characters are supports and they really like Favonius Lance, which makes it stand out even amongst other Favonius weapons. It's one of the most important weapons in the game. I personally leveled up 4 copies, which is probably overkill for 90% of players, but if you're someone like me, there are times where you're using all 4 amongst your 3 teams. So getting more copies of this, you can never complain about. The other weapon, Favonius Codex. Now, I used to say this weapon was quite irrelevant because a lot of catalysts, you didn't really want Favonius Codex on them. But recently, especially with Nefer teams, Favonius Codex, I use it on my Nahida in an Nefer team. You could even use it on Colombina if you want. Also, now that Venti has been buffed and he's a thing now, Rust actually has some use now. It's one of Venti's best budget options because he's now kind of more of a normal attacking DPS. And then let's talk about the 2 signatures, Skirk signature and Escoffier signature. I did make an entire video on this, but here's a quick recap. Skirk signature weapon, Azure Light, is one of the best early upgrades you can get for your Skirk. Now, when I say upgrades for your Skirk, I definitely don't mean get it before her essential teammates Escoffier and Farina. But after that, you're going to get one of the biggest damage increases you can get. Azure Light basically gives Skirk anything she could ever want. High base attack, crit rate, you get some crit damage. It's one of your biggest priorities. Now, conversely, I actually have Escoffier's weapon quite lower down in this table. It's not exactly a priority. And that's because this weapon has quite a few drawbacks. Usually, if you don't have this weapon, you're probably using a budget option like Favonius Lance, which gives energy to your whole team. Now, honestly, in Skirk teams, giving energy to our team is not that important. And usually you're not too worried about your other teammates' damage. Like you can build energy on Farina and whoever else you're using. It's not that big of a deal. But weapons, unlike constellations, do have trade-offs. Even looking at the upsides, this is a big damage increase to Escoffier's personal damage. And it does give an attack buff to your Skirk. However, this attack buff does require you to use Escoffier's burst, meaning it's not a permanent damage buff for your whole team. And it also requires energy, which could also mean you're not getting 100% uptime in stuff like Stygian Onslaught. On top of that, buffing Escoffier's damage is very nice. However, the more invested your Skirk is, the less you care about her teammates' damage, even to the point where, as we've talked about many times now, a lot of people nowadays aren't even using Golden Troop on their Escoffier. It's more trendy nowadays to give your teammates buffing sets, and even Escoffier these days I do use her more on either the scroll set if I'm not playing her with Seat Lully, who's already wants to use this, and if I am playing her with Seat Lully, then I'll even use her with the Noblesse set just for a bit of extra buffs on Skirk. This actually does make a difference the more invested your Skirk is. But there's 2 plus sides with Escoffier's weapon. Number 1, if you get it, unlike constellations on your team, you can actually give this to other characters. In teams where you're using like Eon-san or Chevreuse, stuff like that, Escoffier's weapon is actually a very nice buff for them. So it has that flexibility. Also, and probably more importantly, it's on the same banner as Skirk's weapon, which means even though I have it a bit lower down here in my rankings, you have to factor in that you're pulling for Skirk's weapon. You can also get Escoffier's weapon along the way, which kind of boosts the value of both of them. And it gives a bit of extra incentive that if you were going to get some weapons, now is probably the best time you can ever get to get some weapons. And remember, in Genshin, if you ever want both weapons on a banner, remember the tech, which is basically abusing this fate point system where you're selecting which weapon you want, and then if you're putting on this banner and you manage to get a standard weapon and therefore you build one fate point, the tech is to actually cancel your fate point and switch to the other weapon. If you don't understand why to do that, basically when you're putting on the weapon banner and you get a standard weapon, you don't get either of the two. That means two systems are in play. The first system is just in general, if you get a standard weapon, the next one is guaranteed to be one of the two. And the other system is when you're 1 of 1 on your fate points, your next 5-star is guaranteed to be the weapon you selected here. But that means is if you don't cancel it and you keep pulling, your next weapon is guaranteed to be one of the weapons. But if you do cancel it, because you got a standard, you're still guaranteed that your next one is going to be one of the two. But you have a chance of, if you select the other weapon here, one of the two that you get is the weapon you picked first. That means you're back to 1 of 1 fate points and your next 5-star is guaranteed to be the other one. Do you get it? Does that make sense? Basically, by getting a standard and then cancelling course, you have like a 50% chance of either nothing changes, either you get what you originally wanted first, or you have a chance of getting the other one and then guarantee the next one. So there's no real downsides. You just have a chance of getting in 3 5-stars, getting 2 of the weapons, which is quite nice. Of course, that is reliant on, first of all, you wanting both weapons and also you getting a standard weapon first. So if you don't get a standard weapon first, that doesn't matter. But if you do get a standard weapon first and you do want both weapons, please remember that strategy. It could save you pulls in the long run. If you do have to pick one of these banners to build pity on, let's say you already have Skirk, you already have Escoffier, which one would I recommend building pity on? But as you can see in my calcs here, Escoffier C1 and Skirk C1 are very similar, almost the same thing. In my rankings video, I did say you can get these in any order. I personally do recommend Escoffier C1 first. The damage is very similar to Skirk C1, but first of all, this is unconditional. You get this cryo crit damage. As long as you use Escoffier's E, it has 100% uptime. It doesn't take any skill. But also, Escoffier is a support, which means you might get a bit more teams, a bit more flexibility out of getting that on your Escoffier. Similar thing, I guess, goes if you want to build pity and you don't have either, but you like both. I suppose the same thing would apply, that I would recommend building pity on Escoffier then, just because she is a support. Whereas someone like Skirk, she wants you to have Escoffier anyway. So in both situations, you kind of want Escoffier first. So that's it for this banner review video. Hopefully that helped you decide your pulling strategy for the banner. If you are going to pull for them, good luck on your pulls, guys. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you next time.